I'm back, and it's finally time to talk about Frankenstein, which I've been meaning to do because I actually wrote the script for this video back in like November. So it's now almost March, and by the time this video goes out, it will be March. So yeah, it's been a long time coming. For this video, I am wearing my Monster Mash shirt from Foolish Mortal Supply, and I love them. If you are not aware of them, you should definitely check them out. I'll leave a link to their shop in the description, and I'll pop an image up right here of what the back of my shirt looks like because it's really fun. I also have this shirt from them, which I love very much, so definitely check them out. They do all sorts of spooky themed shirts and sweaters and different things. They also do kind of a Disney goth vibe as well, which I really like. Now on to the video, which is why you're here. This video is about the Frankenstein novel by Mary Shelley. It's not about other adaptations of Frankenstein, though I will be talking about them just to have that reference in there. But it is the 1818 uncensored edition, not the 1831, and that's important. I haven't read the 1831 version, so I don't know for sure what all of the differences are between the two, but I did some research on it just to see what the things were that were changed between the two versions, so this is what I've been able to find. You guys can let me know down in the comments if you have read both versions, but I think that some of the differences are that Elizabeth ended up not being his cousin in the later versions. In the version that I read, she definitely is his cousin, but I think that she becomes an orphan and is not related, just raised with them in the later version. And another change is that in the version that I read, the creature is a lot more morally corrupt, I guess, whereas, or at least free thinking, right? Whereas in the later versions, it becomes more pointedly about the fact that he's a victim. So I'll get into more of that as we go, but there are differences between the two versions. So if I say something about the 1818 version that you disagree with because you read a later version, just keep that in mind, that the books are slightly different. And I just said morally corrupt, but I meant morally ambiguous. Everybody in the story is a lot more morally ambiguous than what I previously thought. Right, so I did not read this book in high school, like a lot of people did, apparently, but I've been meaning to for ages, and so I went into this, I didn't read the Spark Notes on it, I just went off of all of my previously held notions based on films, and I've seen several different types of films. I've seen like the original Universal monster movies, I've seen more recent adaptations that are more focused on the creature. I've seen the Abbott and Costello ones. I've seen just various adaptations, but my point here is that now I'm not satisfied with any of them. Don't get me wrong, I still love the original Universal monster films. Those are really great. I think my favorites of those are probably the Dracula ones, but they're just not, they're not the story though. None of them are, not really. What I'm looking for is something that's a little more of a Kill Your Darling style, and I'll get more into that in the tone section. But first, here are some misconceptions that I had going into the book and things that I learned, and there will definitely be spoilers, although this has been out for a really long time, so if any of this is spoiled for you, I'm sorry. So number one, I feel like the movie that did the best job of being pretty closely tied to the story was The Curse of Frankenstein. But even that one, it was really only about halfway through, and the second half that just totally goes off the rails and is different. But the thing that surprised me was that in the book, they don't spend very much time in the lab. So many Frankenstein adaptations, it's all about building of the creature, and then the climax is like that the creature ends up going on a rampage, and then the townspeople freak out, and it's just like that's the thing, that's the story. We're waiting for the creature to be created. But the book is not like that. The book, the lab portion in it is very small. It's fairly close to the beginning, and not a lot of time is really spent talking about it. So that was the first thing that surprised me. This next surprise, I guess, it may not actually be based in fact, but it's just based on the vibes that I got after watching the films, and it's that most of this in the novel takes place in Switzerland. So that was pretty cool because I just recently went to Switzerland. You can check out my vlog. But in the book, the language that's spoken is mostly French. So I thought that this was German. And I know that they speak German in certain parts of Switzerland, but I thought that this was a German story, and I also just expected it to be more German than it was, I guess. But it's mostly French. They spend time actually talking about the fact that they speak French, and it takes place in Geneva for most of it, which is predominantly French speaking there. So that was just something that surprised me. I totally thought that it was German. I think we're on surprise number 3. There is no angry mob. That's like the quintessential Frankenstein thing, is that the creature's running off and there's a bunch of people with their pitchforks and stuff, and that does not happen. So there's no angry mob, and like no trying to burn the place down, right? And the creature is not like dumb, you know? He speaks very eloquently. In fact, he speaks more eloquently than Victor at times. So he has this whole monologue section that is like several chapters of his life story that we go through, and that was a huge surprise to me. And Victor is the one that dies at the end, not the creature. So in so many of these adaptations that we see, it ends with the angry mob burning the creature down in the windmill, windmill, I think. And so he dies, and it's so sad because it's like, oh my gosh, he didn't get to choose that he was created. He's not inherently violent. This is so sad. If only we could love people who were unlike ourselves. And you know what? That is a theme in this book. But it's not quite that simple. Like I said before, everybody is morally ambiguous in this. Well, maybe not everybody. My dear friend Henry, he's just a ray of sunshine through the entire thing. And you know what? We'll talk more about him in a second. But back to the creature and Victor. So Victor straight up dies at the end. The creature, it's assumed that he dies. He sort of just like wanders off, and it's implied. But we don't know that for sure. Whatever it is, it's very different. It's very different from the way that the creature dies in the film adaptations that I have seen. Victor's also a bit different, and he's just Victor is so emo. He's like, my whole life is one big dark room type of guy. Um, yeah. So he's not like this distinguished doctor man. He's a college student that gets in over his head and spends most of the book depressed. And I think he's got like issues, honestly. Like, I think that there could be a lot done with this book in exploring different types of mental illness, but that's a side point. Anyway, Victor's emo, and he has a lot of emo monologues, which are interesting. And I mentioned Henry, but Henry is his best friend, and maybe Henry is in movie adaptations and I just don't remember him, but we need more of that. Like, he's a golden retriever as a person, and I feel like we've been missing out. I feel like he would be a great addition to the little Frankenstein family in the movies. So I'm sad that I didn't know too much about Henry before, but yeah, he's definitely one of my favorites. And there's no Igor. You know, ever since Young Frankenstein, I don't actually know what the correct way to pronounce that is because they go back and forth with it. But there's no Igor. I feel like Igor is slightly based off of Renfield, actually, which is a Dracula thing, and that's totally different, but I feel like that's something that's been sort of merged as the years have gone on. But there's no Igor. It's just Victor losing his mind in the lab, so there's no assistant. And the monster has super speed and like super strength. So we keep seeing Frankenstein's creature like, oh, he's like a zombie, you know, he walks like this. But this is like totally different. So that was pretty wild. And I've already mentioned the monologues. So yeah, lots of preconceived notions that have just been wiped away after reading this. Moving on to writing style. So before reading this, I was always sort of curious as to why this ended up on so many literature class reading lists. Just thought like, oh, well, that's interesting. Okay. Like, based on the time period, I thought, oh yeah, okay, it's a classic, but I didn't get it. And after reading it, I totally get it. So Mary Shelley's vocabulary alone, I think, is just fantastic, regardless of the story itself, which is also excellent. But it is now one of my favorite books, and it is one of the most well-written books that I've read in a long time. So I definitely recommend it for people that are just literature nerds in general. Looking on Goodreads, it seems like people either loved it or really didn't like it. And that's a little bit difficult because some people just don't like Victor, and so then they rate the story lower, but it's like we're not supposed to be necessarily rooting for him at all times, so I don't really understand that. But what I did see is that there's a lot of people that rate it lower because they find it boring, and you know what? I understand that with classics, there's a certain amount of people will just find them boring because they're not written the same way as contemporary literature is. And it takes a little bit more to get through because of the way that like the sentence structure is and the types of words that are used. And so if you're not used to that, that can be a bit much. But I mean, compared to something like Les Miserables or even Tolkien, like those are books that are difficult to get through, and which I love them. Don't come for me because of that, but I do love those books. They're just dense. But this is not like that at all. So I did not find this book boring. But I can understand why some people might. There's a lot of monologues. I live for that. I love dialogue. I love it when people are like, this is what's going on in my head right now. I'm going to be super melodramatic about it. But I can see that that's not everybody's cup of tea. So I get that. I think to a certain extent, all books have a bit of allegory and symbolism, but this book is packed with it. So I love that. It makes me want to read more books so that I get all of the references and things that are in it. But yeah, there's a lot of monologues. There's a lot of let's unpack this, shall we? But I live for that, as I said. So I had a great time. We're now on to tone, and let me just say, Mary Shelley, she is the OG goth queen. And I have seen her referred in that way before. I didn't really get it. I was like, okay, yeah, monsters, whatever. No. I understand now. And then after doing a bit of research on her, like, definitely. If you go into this book expecting it to be sci-fi horror mad scientist vibes, you would be disappointed. This book is peak dark academia. It is a gothic tale of misery and woes. I was pleasantly surprised. It's also one of those books where you can't really tell if it's queer-coded or just written by a woman, so I think probably about 75% of this book is Victor expressing how sad and pathetic he thinks he is in the most descriptive and dramatic language possible. So if that's not your vibe, I can see how it would be boring. If you're expecting a thrilling tale, like I said, those horror, sci-fi, mad scientist vibes, you may need to read the Spark Notes in order to pass your English class. So I, on the other hand, did a lot of highlighting throughout. I want a Kill Your Darlings meets Penny Dreadful vibe, you know? I want that in a film adaptation. And we keep missing that because we focus on the creature, which I get. I mean, to the point where there are people, I don't know if this is still true, but at some point there were people that didn't know if Frankenstein was referring to the creature or to the doctor. But I would love a story that is focused on Victor and is just honestly gloomy. That would be great. I would love that. Super melodramatic. Just that's what I'm looking for. I want that moment where the creature opens his eyes and Victor is like, oh no. Oh no. I've made a mistake. Where's the undo button? Like, that sort of vibe. I want the scene where Victor is paddling out in his little rowboat and has just really had it with life lately. And he decides, before he's going to deal with his problems, he's just gonna lay back in this boat and look up at the sky and just float. Because life is a lot. And I relate to that. So, like, I want that. Why don't we have that scene? Or because this is just the way that my brain is. I want the scene where Victor realizes that the corpse he's looking at is Henry's and like loses his mind. Why don't we have that, huh? I want that. The whole screaming, crying, throwing up situation passes out. That, like, come on, we are missing that. That adds to the depth of character. Onto themes. So, like with any book, really, this was way more nuanced than any of the films that I have seen. And if throughout this video you're listening to this and you're like, girl, such and such a film from this year totally shows all of that, please leave it down below. Please, I beg of you, I want to see it. I do. So if I'm wrong about saying there are no film adaptations that give me what I want, I would love for that to be proven to me. Thank you. Right, so every time I watch a Frankenstein movie, I'm sad. Like, how could they do this? How could people be so cruel? This is horrible. Why did I decide to watch this? It's so sad, you know? Because they just killed this creature that was literally born yesterday that, like, didn't want to do anything wrong. If he did hurt anybody, it was an accident. He's just trying to make it through life and all of that. And, like, Victor, you know, is the absolute worst in all of these movies. Like, come on. This is very different. So, again, I read the 1818 version. There may have been some changes between the editions. I know that the 1818 one is not the one that is most commonly read in classroom settings. But, like I said before, everybody is morally ambiguous in this. And the creature murders people because he is upset. So it's a vindictive reason. It's not that sort of childlike innocence of he's in a giant body and doesn't know his own strength. No, he makes these choices. And like I said, this is all nuanced, so there's a lot to talk about here. I think that Victor and the creature co-create their downfall. I don't think that you can pin it on either one of them alone. So the monster's monologue to Victor is heartbreaking. And even Victor, like, was one of those you had me in the first half, not gonna lie, type of deals, where he's feeling sad about his role in this. So he feels guilty for the fact that, and when I say he, I'm talking about Victor. Victor feels guilty for having created the creature. And the creature tells him all about trying to connect with his family in the middle of nowhere, and that he was just left alone, which is Victor's fault, but he was left alone, and he's just trying to find his way in the world, and he read a bunch of books, and he learned how to talk, and when he's, like, trying to connect with this family, that's really sad because they react to him purely just off of what he looks like, and, like, they totally freak out when he's done nothing wrong. So it's just appearance-based. So all of that, and he has several different tales of woe as he goes on, that we can all agree is sad, and we're not supposed to judge people based on what they look like. But what follows that is where this becomes a bit of an issue. So the creature, his little monologue, he's got us feeling sad, he's got Victor feeling sad, where he loses Victor, I don't know about the reader, but where he loses Victor is when he's like, oh, by the way, I killed your brother. And this is something that Victor pretty much already knew, but the reasoning is what's concerning. So the creature finds this kid and is like, oh, hey, maybe because he's little, his brain won't have been corrupted yet, you know? Like, oh, maybe he'll still be nice and have that childlike innocence. And so he attempts to kidnap him, which is ill-advised. But he attempts to kidnap him, and the kid is like, dude, you're freaking me out. And the kid's judging him too, which is not great. But when the kids, it comes out that he's got the last name Frankenstein. And the creature is like, oh, Frankenstein. Oh, I know that name. I don't like that guy. So then he kills the child. And with that, it's not even just about the death of Victor's brother. It's that also leads to the death of another innocent party that had nothing to do with this, that the creature totally sets up to take the fall for the murder. Like, there are several different levels to this is bad going on here. And then when Victor is like, actually, I'm not going to make you a wife because I have already screwed up and I don't really wish to continue in that trajectory and play God further. The creature then kills both Henry and Elizabeth. Again, not accidentally. It is premeditated. Like, he does this intentionally. And there are a few references to Paradise Lost throughout the novel. And the creature doesn't just compare himself to Adam, but he also compares himself to Lucifer and being a fallen angel. So we're presented with the themes of somebody being cast out for reasons that are beyond their control. They didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but they were just created. And by nature of being themselves, people hate them, which sucks. So it is definitely exploring that. And if somebody is not given love from the time that they're born, literally, like, that's going to change the way that they view the world. That's going to change the way that they, or not necessarily change, but impact and mold the way that they approach things and deal with life. And this shows somebody that is going through all of that and just eventually hits the point of, why bother? Nobody's ever going to love me anyway, so why should I even try? But you know what? Even he regrets his actions. So at the end of the book, he's talking to this guy Walton, who's on the boat, which is a whole nother thing that I had absolutely no idea was a thing about the book. This guy on the boat in the middle of nowhere in the Arctic. So the creature is telling these things to Walton, and he's like, you know what? I think perhaps maybe I went a little too far when it came to the murders. And listening to this, Walton is a bit torn because on the one hand, just like the readers, he feels sympathy for the creature. But also, it's like, dude, you didn't stop until Victor was dead. So this whole thing is just oh, you know what, revenge doesn't actually make you feel better all the time. So he's got kind of the two sides. I feel like in a lot of ways, the reader is Walton, like in terms of who we're supposed to relate to, is just the guy who the story is being told to. Not necessarily relating more to the creature or more to Victor. Right, so I'm going to make a case for Victor right now. So a lot of people do this thing where they're like, knowledge is knowing that Frankenstein is not the monster. Wisdom is knowing that Frankenstein is the monster, which is this thing where it's like, okay, the creature is not named Frankenstein the way that the world perceives, but when you're talking about who the real monster is, it should still be associated with the name Frankenstein, because Victor Frankenstein did a terrible thing of creating life and then just like throwing it out there and being like, oh well, good luck. But what I feel that a lot of people don't realize because they have not read the book, is how bad Victor feels throughout the vast majority of this story. He immediately feels guilty, and like, yes, he makes bad choices. That's a given. We already know that. But he feels really bad about them. I feel like a lot of people assume that he's just like, oh, can't believe this thing happened. That's, I wonder who did that. Anyway, I think I'm pretty cool and pretty smart and y'all should respect me. That's not how he is at all. He's very melodramatic, but he confesses to the murders and wants to be put in jail for them because he feels like the murders are on his hands, which in a way he's right. If you follow the chain of events back. But he just, the guilt is there. Like I said, from the instant that the creature opens his eyes, Victor is like, oh no. So in terms of what we're supposed to learn from the story or who we're supposed to connect to, like I have sort of said throughout, I think that we are meant to observe. I don't think that we're supposed to side entirely with one person or the other. I think it's more of a thought experiment, and that there's several different things to unpack throughout, and there are good messages in there, like revenge doesn't solve your problems, and don't be mean to people because you don't like what they look like, and I guess pay attention to people's actions, not just what they say, and not just what they look like. So all of those things are good things to learn. And also, don't play God. That doesn't work out well for humankind. And despite how long this video is, I'm sure that there's stuff that I missed because I did not go through and unpack every single paragraph of this story. So if you have more things that you would like to discuss, please leave them down below. I would love to have a comment situation where we get to talk about it, as has happened in some of my previous videos. I enjoy that a lot, hearing what people thought, and not just about like what you thought about what I said, but what you thought about the story in general. So there you have it. Those were my thoughts on the uncensored 1818 edition of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Like I said, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, so remember to like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to my channel. Alright, I'll see you next time. Bye!